what's the current status of climate change? How fast are things changing? And how sure are we about our main conclusions in this field? As you saw in Lesson 3, dealing intelligently with uncertainty can be critical when trying to make the world a better place. To date, global average temperatures have already increased by more than 1 degree Celsius since 1880. And in recent decades, they have been increasing at an accelerated pace of almost 1/5 of a degree per decade. It's pretty clear that, as we've seen in the last 100 years, the more we emit, the hotter the planet will get, broadly. But reliably and accurately extrapolating these trends into the future is a bigger challenge. To help policymakers grapple with the complex science involved and its implications for what we should do, the UN set up the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a United Nations body dedicated to providing the world with objective scientific information about climate change processes and outcomes. It works with hundreds of scientists across the world, reviewing many thousands of papers to produce reports aimed at informing governments and decision makers about climate change. I highly recommend reading its reports, and particularly its latest assessment report, which, at the time of filming, is the 6th assessment report. It's a great example of science communication, explaining its uncertainties, what the information is based on, and producing reports at different levels of granularity and complexity. We'll use a lot of information from those reports in this lesson. The black line here shows how temperature has changed in the last few decades, and the different colored lines show different scenarios considered by the IPCC. There are different scenarios because we're not entirely sure how things will unfold. The thing we're most uncertain about is actually how we, humans, will behave. What happens in the next 100 years depends critically on what policies governments enact, what climate-friendly innovations we develop, and what choices we all make. How bad, for example, do things need to get before people and governments react more strongly and prioritize climate change in their policies? The sociological and geopolitical factors are so complex that it's really hard to say. If that's not enough, we still have some uncertainties about the underlying physical processes. One significant driver of our uncertainty is the effects of feedback loops. As we saw, the greenhouse effect causes global temperatures to rise. This affects cloud formation in a variety of ways, including decreasing the cover of low clouds while pushing higher clouds even higher, or at least that's what we currently think. This in turn affects global warming in multiple ways, at least some of which accelerate warming. And again, the feedback loop continues, in complex ways we don't fully understand. Climate tipping points are extreme examples of such feedback loops, which can drastically and irreversibly change climate behavior. One famous example of this is catastrophic ice sheet collapse, which would lead to reduced sun reflectance, suddenly increasing temperature rise going forward, leading to further ice sheet melting and collapse, and so on. We're not entirely sure exactly when to expect major ice sheet collapses, nor are we sure how much ice will collapse when it happens, and exactly how much that will reduce sun reflectance and therefore accelerate warming. Bottom line, we know there's a lot we don't know. The IPCC deals with this uncertainty by laying out different scenarios and running more than 1,000 physics-based models, each with slightly different initial conditions or differing assumptions about the key uncertainties we have. This uncertainty is often raised by people objecting to climate change action. In many ways, though, I think this uncertainty is the most troubling aspect of climate change. As we'll soon see, there are some disastrous consequences of climate change that we're confident in, which are definitely worth addressing. But one of the best reasons to prioritize climate change is, in my mind, precisely because we're not entirely sure how bad it can get. The change in temperature depends, as we mentioned, on how much CO2 and other greenhouse gases are emitted. Here you can see those same IPCC scenarios, this time showing you how CO2 emissions will change over time under the differing assumptions. Each one is called a Shared Socioeconomic Pathway, or SSP, since it refers to a future trajectory we might all live through. Sometimes people fighting for more climate change action will choose the most provocative way of phrasing things, which can lead us to underestimate the progress that's already been made. SSP 5, which foresees a 5-degree increase, was often referred to as business as usual. This is because when it was developed in the late 2000s, that was the likely and catastrophic result we could expect if we did nothing to address climate change. But in the decade plus since then, we've actually done quite a lot, even if it's not enough. As you can see, even if we only continue with existing policies, we're projected to be closer to SSP 2, which is nowhere near as catastrophic as SSP 5. In the face of the potential harms of climate change, it is common for people to feel desperate or apathetic. But it is crucial to acknowledge the progress that has already been made. That's our new business as usual. Nevertheless, it is important to note that SSP 2 still results in a significant warming of 2.5 degrees, which would still have severe consequences, even if less so than SSP 5. Therefore, we should persist in improving our policies, driven by the recognition that progress is indeed attainable.